There are moments in life that don't announce themselves. They don't knock. They don't ask permission. They simply arrive, quiet, unplanned, almost accidental. And then, years later, you look back and realize that moment was the most precise thing that ever happened to you. I've built systems. I've engineered outcomes. I've studied how forces work and how variables align. And yet, the one thing that changed everything, the one thing that rewired my understanding of connection, of fate, of what it means to truly find someone, wasn't planned, it wasn't calculated, it wasn't even meant for her. It was a message sent to the wrong person, delivered by something I still can't fully explain.
Yes, actors.
Have you ever sent something into the world, a word, a feeling, a reach, and had the universe redirect it somewhere you never expected? And then, slowly, realized it landed exactly where it was supposed to? That's what this is about. That's what I need you to hear. I used to believe in control. I used to believe that if you mapped the variables correctly, if you studied the angles, understood the forces, built the right systems, you could determine outcomes. I believed that precision was the highest form of intelligence, that the universe rewarded the prepared, that accidents were just failures of planning.
Name sucks for Master.
And everything I thought I knew about how life works, about how love works, quietly, irreversibly, cracked open.
All right.
I want to sit with you here for a moment, not as someone who has answers, not as someone who has figured it out, but as someone who has stood in the middle of something he couldn't explain and chose to stop running from the mystery of it. Because here's what I've learned. The most important arrivals in your life will never come with a warning. They will come like wind, not the kind you hear before a storm, the quiet kind, the kind that moves things without you realizing anything has moved. Think about that for a second. When did something that changed your life actually announce itself? When did the moment that rewired your heart give you time to prepare? I'll tell you the honest answer. It never does. And the reason it never does is because the heart doesn't operate on schedules. It doesn't respond to strategy. It responds to something older than logic, something that most of us spend our whole lives trying to rationalize and never fully can. There's a word people use for this: fate. And I know that word makes some of you uncomfortable. It sounds passive. It sounds like surrender. And I spent a long time rejecting it for exactly that reason. I didn't want to believe that something as significant as connection could exist outside my control. Because if love is fated, then what does that say about agency? What does that say about choice? But here's what nobody told me. Fate and choice aren't opposites. They're partners. Fate creates the moment. Choice determines what you do inside it. The wind can carry a letter across the sky, but you still have to open it. You still have to read it. You still have to decide, is this meant for me? Or do I hand it back to the air and pretend it never arrived? That's where I was, holding something that arrived unexpectedly. A message sent in a direction I didn't consciously aim, and there she was, on the receiving end of something I hadn't designed for her. And instead of the universe correcting the error, it let the moment breathe. It let the accident become an opening. And in that opening, something began. I want you to understand something about the psychology of unexpected arrivals. When something comes to you outside of your plan, outside of your narrative, there's a very human instinct to distrust it. We are pattern-seeking creatures. We want our stories to make sense. We want the setup to match the payoff. So when love arrives sideways, when connection appears from a direction you weren't facing, the first response is often suspicion, not excitement. Suspicion, because it doesn't fit the map you drew. Have you ever felt that too? That strange discomfort when something good arrives in a way that wasn't supposed to happen? I have. And I want to tell you what's underneath that discomfort. It isn't caution, it isn't wisdom, it's fear. It's the fear that if you didn't orchestrate it, you can't sustain it. It's the fear that things which arrive accidentally leave accidentally. That what the wind brings, the wind takes back. But that's not how it works. That is one of the most quietly devastating lies we tell ourselves about love. Because here's the truth about accidents, the real ones, the meaningful ones. They aren't random. They are the product of two people moving through the world in alignment before they ever met. Every choice you made that brought you to that moment, every late night, every priority, everything you cared deeply about, all of it was quietly shaping the trajectory that made the collision possible. It looked like an accident from the outside. From the inside of the full story, it was inevitable. That message I sent, it wasn't random either. It came from something real inside me. A thought, a feeling, a reach towards something I couldn't fully name yet. And the fact that it arrived at her door instead of where I intended, that wasn't chaos. That was precision of a different kind. The kind that doesn't belong to spreadsheets or strategies. The kind that belongs to something deeper than either of us. Let me get even more honest with you here. When I look back at the moments that actually defined my life, not the accomplishments, not the launches, not the milestones the world measured, but the moments that changed who I am at the cellular level, every single one of them came unexpectedly. They came through side doors I didn't know existed. They came wrapped in something that looked ordinary until it wasn't. And this is the thing about meaningful accidents. They require a certain kind of person to recognize them. Not intelligence, not experience, presence. You have to be present enough to feel that something just shifted. You have to be open enough, not naive, not desperate, but open enough to let the unexpected become significant instead of dismissing it as noise. Most people miss the moment, not because it doesn't come, it comes for everyone. They miss it because they're already somewhere else in their head. They're rehearsing the future or grieving the past. They're looking for the love story they scripted, and they walk right past the one that was actually written for them. I almost missed it. I want to be honest about that. I almost cataloged it as a small, forgettable thing, a miscommunication, an error to correct, a moment to move past quickly. And something in me said, wait, slow down. Look at this longer than your instinct is telling you to. That pause, that one breath of presence, that's where everything began. This is what I want you to carry with you. The quality of your attention determines the quality of your life. Not your ambition, not your talent, your attention. Where you place it, how long you hold it, how willing you are to stay in a moment long enough to see what it's actually offering you. Because a letter delivered by the wind doesn't wait forever on your doorstep. If you don't pick it up, the wind takes it back, and you'll never know what it said. Tell me, when was the last time something arrived in your life that you almost dismissed? Something small, unplanned, almost invisible, that if you had looked away 1 second earlier, you would have missed completely. I think about this more than people realize. I think about the smallness of the pivot points, how the biggest turns in a life are almost always disguised as minor moments. A message slightly misdirected, a door that should have been closed but wasn't, a word you weren't supposed to hear but did. These are not flukes. These are the architecture of something that was being built without your awareness. And that's what I want you to start believing. Not blindly, not passively, but with the eyes of someone who pays attention. Start believing that the meaningful accidents in your life are not errors. They're evidence. Evidence that something in you, your energy, your focus, your longing, has been quietly broadcasting a signal. And every once in a while, the universe finds someone whose signal matches yours, and it redirects the message to correct the mistake, to make the introduction. I think about her sometimes, the version of her that existed before she received something that wasn't meant for her. Going about her day, ordinary morning, nothing in the air to suggest that something was coming. And I think about myself, going about mine, sending something into a direction I thought I understood, not knowing that the wind had other plans. Two people, moving through the world in parallel. And then one moment, one small, unspectacular, completely ordinary looking moment, and the lines converged. That's not chaos.
That's the most beautiful kind of design. I've ever witnessed.
And it taught me something I could not have taught myself. It taught me that the most important things in your life will rarely arrive the way you imagined. They'll arrive the way they were always going to, through the cracks in your planning, through the spaces between your intentions, through the quiet, persistent, elegant precision of something that knows more about your needs than you do. All you have to do is be present enough to notice, brave enough to stay, and honest enough to admit, this wasn't in my plan. Maybe that's exactly why it's everything. Nobody tells you about the waiting. Nobody prepares you for the long, quiet stretch of time when you're building your mind, your vision, your world. And somewhere underneath all that construction, there is a part of you that is also building something else. Something you can't blueprint. Something you can't pitch to a room or test against a metric. Something that exists in the private architecture of who you are becoming, slowly, silently, without announcement. You don't realize it while it's happening. That's the thing. You think you're just working, just moving, just pushing forward through the weight of everything you're trying to create. But underneath the ambition, underneath the discipline, underneath every late night where it was just you and the blankness of a problem waiting to be solved, underneath all of that, you were being shaped, not just professionally, not just intellectually. You were being shaped for a moment you hadn't met yet. And the moment arrives, and you are exactly ready for it, even though you never once said the words, I am getting ready. I want to sit with that paradox for a moment, because I think it's one of the most misunderstood things about human growth. We tend to think of readiness as a conscious state. We say things like, when the time is right, when I'm ready, when I've done enough work on myself, as if readiness is a door you walk through deliberately, as if you get to choose when you arrive at it. But real readiness, the kind that matters, doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly in the background, while you're occupied with everything else. It builds in the spaces between your intentions. It grows in the silences you didn't plan, and when the moment finally comes, when the unexpected arrives, and the wind drops something at your door, you reach for it not because you prepared to, but because somewhere deep in your wiring, you became someone who could. Have you ever looked back at a moment in your life and thought, how did I handle that so well? Where did that come from? I didn't think I was capable of that yet. That's readiness you didn't know you had. That's the architecture working without your permission. And here's what I've come to believe about the way the heart prepares itself for love. It doesn't prepare by being careful. It doesn't prepare by building walls or testing scenarios or keeping score on the people who came before. It prepares through depth. It prepares by becoming more of itself. Every time you went deeper into your own values, every time you chose honesty over comfort, purpose over applause, stillness over noise, you were adding a layer to something that would one day recognize another person's depth and know, without calculation, that it matched. This is the psychology of attraction that no one talks about enough. We talk about chemistry, we talk about timing, we talk about compatibility, as though it's a checklist you run through. But the real pull, the kind that makes a misdirected message feel like it arrived exactly where it was supposed to, comes from resonance. And resonance isn't something you perform, it's something you become. But here's what nobody told me. You can be deeply ready and still be completely surprised. In fact, I think the deepest readiness always comes with surprise, because the thing you were ready for was never what you imagined. The version of love you pictured, the version you'd been quietly rehearsing in your mind, it almost never looks like the real thing when it finally shows up. The real thing is stranger, quieter, more ordinary on the surface, and somehow more total underneath. She wasn't what I was looking for, and I mean that as the highest form of compliment I know how to give. Because what I was looking for was the limited version, the version constructed from expectation and pattern. What arrived was the complete version, constructed by something that understood me better than I understood myself. That's the gift of unexpected arrivals. They bypass your limitations. They come in a form you couldn't have consciously chosen because your conscious mind didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. And in doing so, they expand you. They don't just give you a person, they give you a new version of what you thought was possible. Let me ask you something. How many times have you walked away from something or someone because it didn't match the picture in your head? Not because it was wrong, not because it wasn't good, but because it was unfamiliar. because it arrived through a side door instead of the front entrance, because it didn't feel like what you planned. I've done it. I think most of us have. And I'm not saying every unexpected thing deserves your full yes. Discernment is real. Wisdom is real. But there is a difference between discernment and fear wearing the mask of standards. There is a difference between trusting your instincts and mistaking your comfort zone for your compass. Real love, real, grown, serious love, will almost always require you to tolerate a degree of uncertainty that your planning mind deeply resists. It will ask you to be present with something unresolved, to sit with the not yet knowing of it, to say, I don't fully understand this yet. I don't know where this goes, but I'm not running from it. And that willingness to stay on the open question is one of the most courageous things a human being can do. And that's when everything I believed about strength fell apart. Because I used to think strength in this area meant knowing what you wanted with precision. I used to think emotional intelligence meant having clarity at all times about how you feel, about what you need, about where you're going, and who fits into that picture. I wore that version of clarity like armor, and it protected me. I won't pretend it didn't. But it also kept things out. Good things. Real things. Things that didn't know how to knock the way I expected a knock to sound. The armor was the problem. Not the world. Not the people in it. Me. My certainty. My locked map. My insistence that love should arrive in a form I recognized immediately, rather than a form I had to spend real time with. Real, quiet, unhurried time to fully understand. She arrived in a form I had to spend time with. And that was the first true test of the readiness I didn't know I had. Could I slow down enough? Could I put down the drive long enough to actually be in the presence of something that wasn't a mission or a system, but a human being, full, complex, contradictory in the most beautiful ways, unknowable in the ways that matter most? That slowing down, that's not a weakness. That is the work. That is the most important and underrated work a person driven by vision can ever do. Learning to be as fully present with a person as you are with a purpose. Because here's the psychological truth underneath all of it. You cannot deeply connect with someone you are only partially present for. You can admire them from a distance. You can appreciate them abstractly. You can even say you love them. But connection, real, cellular, lasting connection, requires that you actually show up, that your attention is not split between the person in front of you and the version of yourself you're trying to build. That for this moment, right here, this person is the most important variable. That's what you deserved. Not the residue of my attention after everything else had been served. Not the part of me that was left over at the end of a long day, but the deliberate, chosen, fully awake version of me, sitting still enough to actually see her. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that still moves me when I think about it, is that the unexpected nature of how she arrived made that presence easier, not harder. Because I hadn't had time to rehearse. I hadn't had time to build a performance. I hadn't had time to decide what version of myself to show up as. I was just there, unscripted, slightly off balance, fully real. And maybe that's the secret that meaningful accidents carry inside them. They strip the performance away before you have a chance to put one on. They catch you as you actually are, not as you were planning to be. And they say, look, this is the one. Not the version you prepared, this one. Right now. Is this enough? And for the first time in a long time, I didn't answer with strategy. I answered with presence. And that, I think, is where it really began. Not the message, not the misdirection, not the beautiful accident of how we arrived at the same moment, but the second that one unguarded, completely honest second, where I stopped performing readiness and simply was it. You can't rehearse that moment. You can only become the person who, when it arrives, doesn't flinch. That's the only preparation that ever mattered. There is a particular kind of fear that doesn't come from danger. It doesn't come from risk. Not the kind you calculate. Not the kind you can manage with preparation or contingency. It comes from something quieter than danger and more paralyzing than failure. It comes from the possibility of being fully seen by another human being. And it is, without question, the most underestimated challenge in the entire landscape of human connection. I have stood in rooms where the stakes were enormous. I have faced outcomes that had no guaranteed path forward. I have sat inside the uncertainty of things that most people would have walked away from. And none of it prepared me for the specific vulnerability of sitting across from someone and feeling in my bones that she was actually looking at me. Not at what I'd built, not at what I represented, not at the version of me the world had decided to recognize. At me, the unfinished, contradictory, privately uncertain version that lives underneath all of it. And my first instinct, I'll be honest with you, was to redirect her gaze. That's what we do. When someone looks too closely, too directly, with too much genuine interest in who we actually are, beneath the surface, the trained response is deflection. We offer something impressive instead of something true. We talk about what we've done rather than what we feel. We build a highlight reel in real time and call it conversation. And most people accept the reel because most people are doing the same thing. Two people performing openness for each other, neither one truly seen, both walking away wondering why the connection felt thin. Have you ever left a conversation feeling strangely lonely, even though you talked for hours? That's what's happening there. You were both present in the room, but absent from the exchange. The words were real, but the person behind them was behind glass, and you felt it. The warmth of the interaction without the heat of genuine contact. It's one of the most common forms of quiet loneliness in modern life, and almost no one names it directly. I know that loneliness. I know what it's like to be surrounded by people who know everything about what you do and nothing about who you are. I know the particular exhaustion of being understood only at the surface level, of being interesting to people as a phenomenon, but invisible to them as a human being. And after enough years of that, you stop expecting anything different. You adjust your expectations downward. You tell yourself, this is fine. This is enough. You build a life around the assumption that being fully known is either not possible or not worth the exposure it costs. And then someone looks at you with a kind of attention that doesn't have an agenda behind it, and everything adjusts. But here's what nobody told me. Being truly seen doesn't feel the way you imagine it will. You think it will feel warm immediately, like relief, like coming home. Sometimes it does. But often the first thing it feels like is exposure. Like the lights came on in a room you'd been comfortable navigating in the dark. Like someone read a letter you wrote to yourself, the one you never intended for anyone else's eyes. It feels, for a moment, like too much, like vulnerability at a frequency your nervous system wasn't tuned to receive. I mean, that discomfort, that specific, almost electric discomfort of being seen, is the exact moment where most people retreat. They pull back, they qualify, they dial themselves down. They say, without words, that's close enough, don't come further. And the connection, which had a real chance of becoming something total, becomes instead something managed, something safe, something that never quite gets to the depth where real love lives. I could have done that. Part of me wanted to. The part that had learned through years of operating environments where vulnerability is treated as liability, that exposure has costs, that the more someone knows about the interior of you, the more power they have to disappoint you. The more they can see your real shape, the more precisely they can leave a mark when they go. That calculation is not irrational. I want to be clear about that. The fear of being known is not weakness. It is the accumulated intelligence of every time you opened up and had that openness mishandled. It is the logical response to a pattern. It is your system protecting you from a confirmed risk. But systems built entirely for self-protection eventually protect you from the wrong things. And that's when everything I thought was armor revealed itself as a cage. Because here is the psychological truth, the one that changed the way I think about every meaningful relationship in my life. You cannot receive what you will not let in. The protection that keeps the pain out also keeps the love out. You cannot be selectively permeable at the emotional level. You cannot say, I'll let in the warmth but not the vulnerability. I'll accept the connection but not the exposure. That's not how it works. The wall doesn't have that kind of precision. You're either open or you're closed. And closed means safe from hurt and safe from everything that makes being alive feel like it means something. I think about this often in the context of people who are building something great, people who are pouring everything into a vision, a purpose, a mission, and who have quietly, without noticing, started to apply the same logic to love that they apply to systems: efficiency, control, predictable inputs and measurable outputs, maximum return on emotional investment, minimum exposure to uncontrolled variables. And I understand it completely. I lived inside that logic for years. But a person is not a system, and love is not a variable you optimize. And the attempt to make it one, the attempt to stay in control of the full emotional experience, is what keeps the most driven, most capable, most genuinely extraordinary people from ever arriving at the thing they actually want most deeply. Don't pretend you haven't felt it. That tension between the version of you that wants to be fully known and the version of you that believes being fully known is too dangerous to risk.
You know what I mean.
So, how did it shift? How did I get from the instinct to redirect her gaze to the willingness to hold it? I'll tell you, and this is the part that surprised me most. It didn't happen through a decision. It wasn't a choice I made strategically, rationally, after weighing the options. It happened through exhaustion, through the specific tiredness that comes from performing a version of yourself for so long that you can no longer clearly remember which parts are real and which parts you built for consumption. I was tired of my own armor. That's the honest answer. Not dramatically tired, not broken, not in crisis. Just quietly, profoundly ready to stop carrying the weight of a curated self. And she happened to arrive at exactly that moment of readiness. That moment when the performance had become heavier than the risk of truth. And I looked at her, and I let her look back. And here's what I want you to hold. What I need you to really sit with. Being known by the right person does not reduce you. It does not make you smaller or weaker or more fragile. It does the exact opposite. There is a particular kind of strength that only becomes available to you after you have been genuinely witnessed by another human being. Not validated, witnessed, not told you're wonderful, truly seen, including the parts that are unfinished, including the parts that contradict the public version, including the quiet doubts and the private fears and the things you want that you've never said out loud. When someone sees all of that and stays, something in your foundation shifts permanently. It becomes weight bearing in a way it wasn't before, because now your sense of self is no longer constructed entirely from the inside. It has an external anchor, a witness, someone who knows the full inventory and chose to remain. That kind of being known doesn't make you dependent. It makes you more free because you are no longer spending energy on the management of your own image with that person. You are free to simply be and to grow inside the safety of someone else's full awareness. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. And it arrived like every important thing in my life, not because I engineered it, not because I planned for it, but because one unexpected message opened a door I hadn't known I was ready to walk through. And on the other side of it, someone was waiting who had the courage to actually look. I want to talk about trust. Not the word is easy. People say it all the time, in all kinds of contexts, with all kinds of meanings that collapse the moment they're tested. I want to talk about what trust actually is, at the structural level, what it's made of, how it forms, why it fails, and why, when it's real, when it's genuinely, carefully, honestly built between two people, it becomes the most load-bearing thing in a human life. Because here's what I've come to understand after sitting with this for a long time. Trust is not a feeling. Feelings are weather. They shift, they intensify, they dissolve, they return in different forms. You cannot build a life on weather. Trust is not the warmth you feel in someone's presence. It is not the excitement of early connection or the relief of being understood. Those things are real and they matter, but they are not trust. They are the emotional invitation to the possibility of trust. They are the door. Trust is what gets built after you walk through it. Trust is a construction, deliberate, incremental, made of small moments that most people underestimate because they don't look significant while they're happening. A promise kept quietly when no one was watching. A truth offered when a comfortable lie would have cost nothing. A moment where someone could have chosen themselves and chose you instead, not dramatically, not with announcement, just cleanly, without hesitation, as though it was the only possible answer. Those are the bricks, and they accumulate slowly, invisibly, until one day you realize I would fall backward into this person without looking. Not because I have no fear, but because the evidence of who they are has outweighed the fear. Have you ever trusted someone that completely, where the evidence was so consistent, so unbroken, that the fear simply ran out of arguments? That's what I mean. And I want to be honest about how rare it is. Because we live in a time that is simultaneously more connected than any period in human history, and more fundamentally distrustful. We are surrounded by information about people, and yet genuinely, deeply known by almost none of them. We share our lives publicly and guard our interiors ferociously. We've become extraordinarily skilled at the performance of openness while remaining fundamentally closed to the level of exposure that real trust requires. And part of the reason, a large part, is that we've been disappointed, not once, repeatedly, by people we believed in, by moments we thought were solid that turned out to be fragile, by trust we extended that was mishandled, not always cruelly, sometimes just carelessly, and the carelessness hurt just as much as the cruelty would have. Maybe more, because cruelty at least suggests that your presence registered. Carelessness suggests it didn't even warrant the effort of a decision. I think about the psychology of this carefully. When trust is broken, not destroyed, but chipped at, repeatedly, in small ways, it doesn't heal cleanly. It heals with scar tissue. And scar tissue is protective, yes, but it's also less sensitive, less capable of the kind of fine sensation that real intimacy requires. And so over time, someone who has been repeatedly disappointed doesn't become someone who trusts carelessly. They become someone who doesn't quite trust fully. They give 60% and call it everything. They are present but slightly withheld. They love but keep a small private corner of themselves in reserve, a corner they don't show anyone, as insurance against the day the whole thing comes apart. And the tragedy, the genuine tragedy, is that the very protection designed to prevent the pain of disconnection also prevents the depth of connection. You can't have one without surrendering the other. You cannot be 60% in and 100% loved at the same time. The withholding communicates itself. The other person feels it. Maybe not consciously, maybe not with language, but they feel the temperature of it. They feel the edge where your presence stops and the reserve begins. But here's what nobody told me. The path back to full trust does not begin with finding someone trustworthy. It begins with understanding what you've been carrying, with sitting down honestly, not self-critically, not with guilt, but with clear eyes, and acknowledging the weight of the old disappointments you've been hauling into every new room. Naming them, not to dwell on them, but to recognize that the wariness you bring to a new connection is not always information about the new person. Sometimes it is historical static, noise from a frequency that is no longer broadcasting. Conflating the two, treating the present person as if they are the past wound, is one of the most quietly destructive things we do in the name of self-protection. She didn't do the things that had made trust difficult. She showed up differently, consistently. In the small ways, which are always the truest ways, she demonstrated something patient and real. And I had a choice, to let the historical static override what the present evidence was actually telling me, or to do the harder thing, the braver thing, which is to let new evidence replace old conclusions. That replacement is an act of courage. I need you to understand that. Choosing to trust again, after the record you've lived, is not naivety, it is not weakness. It is one of the most sophisticated emotional moves a human being can make, because it requires simultaneously honoring what you've been through and refusing to let it determine your ceiling. And that's when everything I thought wisdom looked like needed to be rethought.
That the smart response to past disappointment was
Because I had confused protection with wisdom for a long time. I thought the smart response to past disappointment was to build better filters, higher standards, stricter criteria, longer waiting periods before extending real access to the interior. And those things are not wrong exactly. Discernment matters. I'm not telling you to open yourself indiscriminately to anyone who smiles in your direction. I'm telling you something more specific and more demanding than that. I'm telling you that wisdom in love is not about how quickly you close. It's about how accurately you read. It's about developing the emotional precision to distinguish between a person who has earned more access and a person who merely desires it, between someone who is consistent in the quiet moments and someone who is only present when it's rewarding, between someone who is honest with you when honesty costs them something and someone who is only honest when it's convenient. That reading, that discernment, is the real skill, and it cannot be done from behind full armor. It requires some degree of openness, because the only way to truly read someone is to let yourself be in actual proximity to them, not managed proximity, not carefully controlled access. Real proximity, where you can feel the texture of who they are in the small, unscripted moments. Think about that. You cannot assess the quality of someone's character by watching their performance. You can only assess it by being with them when they're not performing, when they're tired, when they're disappointed, when they don't get what they want, when the situation costs them something. What does a person look like in those moments? Who do they become when the incentive to impress is gone? That's where trust either forms or doesn't. Not in the grand gestures, though those matter. In the unremarkable Tuesday mornings, in the moment of friction that could have become a rupture and didn't, because someone chose to stay present instead of defensive. In the silence that was comfortable, because there was nothing to prove inside it. And here's what I want you to take into your own life, into your own relationships, wherever they are right now. Stop measuring trust by feeling, and start measuring it by pattern. Feelings can be manufactured, patterns cannot. A feeling can be generated in a single intense moment. A pattern requires time, repetition, and consistency across varied conditions. Feelings tell you what someone wants you to experience. Patterns tell you who they actually are. And when the pattern is real, when it holds across the easy days and the hard ones, across the moments of clarity and the moments of confusion, something settles in you that no amount of logic could have produced on its own. A certainty that doesn't live in your head. It lives somewhere lower, somewhere older. The part of you that was there before language, before strategy, before all the intelligent systems you built around your own vulnerability. That part of you knows. And when it knows, when the pattern has built itself into something load-bearing, and the scar tissue has softened enough to let real sensation back through, you stop managing the connection. You stop auditing it. You stop waiting for the moment it reveals itself as temporary. You simply trust. And the extraordinary thing about arriving at that place, the thing that surprised me most deeply, is what it does to you as a person, not just in the relationship, in everything. There is a stability that enters your life when one person truly has you, a groundedness that doesn't depend on external outcomes, a quiet center of gravity that remains even when everything around it is in motion. Because when you know, bone deep, evidence built, fully tested know, that one person sees you clearly and chooses you consistently, you stop needing the world's approval to feel real. You already are. And everything you build from that foundation holds differently.